Today we've got Beth and Jody who are right in front of me at the moment. Whoops, hang on, what's going on here? So I've got Beth and Jody right up in front of me at the moment. We're having a bit of a walk through the old cemetery to see if we can find some notice boards of some of the historic people that were here. This guy was a prisoner of war. His name was Richard William Rees. He lived in Perth, and he sustained a gunshot wound in his back haulch, and he became a prisoner of war in Darmstadt in Germany, and he actually lived to come back here and return back to Australia in 1919. So this guy was a prisoner of war. Thank you for your service. And I don't know where Beth and Jody got to. They're somewhere up in the cemetery. Just going to seek out some of these notice boards and just see what sort of characters we can actually find that are interred here in the Ballarat cemetery. Going through a little bit of a history sort of thing today. Also got the K2 happening, as you can see at the bottom of the screen on the right hand side, and that's been going off quite a bit as we're walking around. This grave belongs to Lieutenant John M. Walker, and the 1st Australian Flying Squadron was killed in action in 1918. And again, there's a little plaquey thing here, so if there's any spirit around that wish to come forward, the phone, I'll just tell you right now, does not set off this K2 meter. I've got it set in such a way that it won't, so if there's any interaction from the K2 meter, as you can see now, it's definitely not from the phone. So an early pilot loss. This plaque says Walker John Mercer was a Ballarat chemist, and he worked in Sturt Street here in Ballarat. He enlisted in September 14. He left Australia. He initially joined the 3rd Light Horse Field Ambulance, with whom he saw action at Gallipoli. During 1917 he transferred to train with the Royal Flying Corps and graduated as 2nd Lieutenant. In November that year he was killed in action in Palestine, 1918, while serving with the Australian Flying Corps. So blessings to you for your service, and this is where he now lays. Got a little friend with me today. What breed was he?
He's an American soft-coated Wheaten Terrier.
American soft-coated Wheaten Terrier.
Yes.
Oh, I've never heard that breed before. Beautiful dog, so friendly too. Whoops, there he goes. Oh, he goes, having a good explore around the cemetery too. Got another grave here. Private Archibald Snedden, who's killed in action, and of course some other people there. And we'll just have a look at this one here. The Sacrifice of Golden Point Boys. Archibald Snedden, known as Archie, attended the Golden Point State School in Ballarat. Right, I'm just having a quick read through. He embarked for overseas service in 1916 on the Suffolk, gotta muck up that word. He was serving with the 8th Battalion when he was killed in action during the advance of Polygon Wood on September the 20th, 1917. We've got the K2 meter going off too. That's you, Archibald. Can you light it right up for us? As much as you can. Yeah, thank you very much. Saw you hit the red then. Do you like the idea of doing a little bit of a history sort of walkthrough here? Okay, he was initially buried near where he fell, but later reburied at Tyncott Cemetery in Belgium. And obviously from here, they probably interred him here, or maybe not. Or maybe it's just part of his family that are here. Doesn't actually say. There's a bit of a mystery for us. Run into a few people today in the cemetery, having a good old walk around, and they keep stopping and asking, "What are you doing?" But what a beautiful day out here. Got a little story with this one as well. His grave stated not a blood relative, Roy Luyton. He was a foster son of Fanny Goad from Armstrong Street in Ballarat. And Annie brought him up, and he was 18. He was a slaughterman when he enlisted in 1915 and went to the First World War. He became a 1st Brigade Australian Field Artilleryman, and he earned a military medal in October 1917. He suffered a fatal gunshot wound in his stomach while fighting near Amiens, and is buried in Adelaide Cemetery. Now, Mrs. Goad, the storyline goes here, had a lot of difficulty trying to retrieve his military medal, although it was resolved in her favour eventually. And I guess that was because she was a foster son. Roy was a foster son, and Annie, obviously because of the foster son thing, had difficulty gaining his military medal when he passed away. And this is the grave of Annie, and Francis and James, and also down the bottom says the driver, who was Roy Luyton, who was killed in action in France. This is a grave of someone who was very unlucky, Corporal Albert E.V. Thomas. Albert Ernest Victor Thomas. He served at the 1st Light Horse Regiment and was wounded in Gallipoli. He sustained a wound to his left thigh. After recovering, he was assigned a post office duty in Alexandria, Egypt. He was later transferred to an Australian-based post office in London, where he was promoted to sergeant. In 1918, he returned to his old unit, the 4th Light Horse Regiment, which was now fighting in Palestine, and was wounded again near Damascus in 1918. He survived after surviving the trenches of Gallipoli and the deserts of the Middle East. Deserts, sorry, not deserts. He died of influenza and myocarditis in Egypt. He was aged 30. He is buried in the Cairo War Memorial Cemetery and proudly remembered here as one of the Anzacs. Now, there's a lovely little grave, is the memorial, and as it says here, he's actually buried in a Cairo War Memorial Cemetery. Now, how cool is that? That's a bit of a story. In memory of the beloved children of John and Ellen Neal, corporal in Her Majesty's 40th Regiment. Fanny died on 19th of March 1857, aged 3 years and 8 months. Agnes died April 10th, 1857, aged 1 year and 4 months. May they rest in peace. In this place, with other soldiers and civilians of the military camp then in Ballarat, were buried the remains of the British soldiers Henry Christopher Wise, Captain, Michael Rooney and Joseph Wall, Privates, and William Webb, Felix Boyle and John Hall, who fell dead or fatally wounded at the Eureka Stockade in brave devotion to duties on Sunday the 3rd of December 1854, whilst attacking a band of aggrieved diggers in arms against what they regarded as a tyrannous administration. So in this area here are some of those people, wherever they are. Notice the K2 going off quite a bit, and as I'm walking around when I haven't got the phone on, it's still going off madly. This one is 20 generations of soldiers. Percy Gilchrist is commemorated on the grave of his parents, Edward and Maria. He was Ballarat born, 36-year-old geologist, and he enlisted in 1915. Just read a quick through. He got a Distinguished Service Order, which is only second to the Victoria Cross, for gallantry and devotion to duty on the night of 29th and 30th of August 1918 at Clary, in charge of his company for only 28 men with 25 prisoners. He was attacked by some 150 of the enemy. His performance was a splendid one, and it was due to his determined courage and able leadership that his company, beside holding out, retained their prisoners. The end of the war was in sight when he was killed in action at Tincourt just 10 days later. On September 9th, 1918, he was carried to the 41st Casualty Clearing Station by Private Mitchell and Padre Gola. He is buried at Heath Cemetery in France. Another great little story of somebody who served for Australia and died overseas and is buried overseas, but still commemorated here in Ballarat's cemetery. Another interesting story, a little bit of history. An Anzac larrikin, Joseph Henry Scott. So he went to France in Gallipoli with the 6th Field Ambulance. He was obviously a driver. On September 15, 1916, he was charged with conduct to the prejudice of good military order and discipline, in that he neglected to comply with traffic regulations, thereby causing an accident to a horse which necessitated its destruction. His penalty being the loss of 7 days' pay and the confiscation of his driver's certificate. With this incident behind him, he continued to serve and was promoted to corporal on the 18th of August 1918, less than 3 months before the end of the war. He was killed by a shell burst and is buried at Daos Communal Cemetery Extension, which is probably in France. He was aged 29. Well, there you go. Bit of a larrikin there. Killed at the Gallipoli landing, Frederick William Watson. There was speculation he had been drowned after jumping into the water from the landing. He was listed as missing in action, but in June 1916 a court of inquiry found him killed in action. The inquiry took evidence that he was seen pushing inland from the beach when he was shot, but his mates were unable to reach him in no man's land, as they called it. He has no known grave, but is remembered on the grave of his parents and on the Australian Memorial at Lone Pine, Gallipoli. A little bit of a sad story for a family. It's hard losing one person in the war, but this is two brothers killed in the same battle. The Daly brothers, James and William. Let's have a bit of a read through. You can have a bit of a read yourself. Bit of a sad loss for the family. Another grave here in Ballarat Cemetery, old cemetery. Cousins who gave their all. Harold Gordon Cornell. He joined the 69th Squadron, Australian Flying Corps, as a wireless operator. And he was killed and crashed near Dernicourt in France. He was 27 years old and is buried in Dernicourt Communal Cemetery Extension. His cousin, Osborne Cornell, was a 21-year-old chemist when he enlisted in 1914. He served with the ambulance and the 3rd Machine Gun Battalion. He was killed in action on August the 18th, 1918. And he is commemorated on the Australian National Memorial at Villiers Batones, however you pronounce it, in France. There we go. What a beautiful day out here. And we're finding some sad stories. This one's a mother's grief. Andrew Duncan Morrow from Sturt Street in Ballarat was educated at Ballarat College. He was 28 years old. He was a bank clerk and he enlisted in 1914. 2 months later, with the 1st Light Horse Field Ambulance in 1916 while in Egypt, he was transferred to the 59th Battalion, and in February he was commissioned to a 2nd Lieutenant. On July 19th he was reported as missing in action, but the following day he was taken to the 2nd Australian Casualty Clearing Station, suffering from a gunshot wound to his face. At the age of 30 he died of his wounds and was buried in the Ballarat Community Cemetery Extension near Lille in France. His brother Thomas Cuthbert Morrow, who was 34 years old and married to Lucy, was wounded during the fierce fighting at Passchendaele in Belgium and died of his wounds. He was buried at, well here we go after names again, Lysenfolk Military Cemetery. The 3rd brother, Hugh Gordon Morrow, served in France from November 1916, but the death Thomas made him feel he should be at home. His mother was already a widow and had now lost 2 sons, so in February 1918 he applied to return to Australia for family reasons. His application was approved and he returned safely in 1918 to support his grieving mother. So it's a bit of a sad tale, but with a little bit of a nicer ending. This place is absolutely fascinating. It's just got a lot of different stories around, a lot of different areas, and some real fascinating headstones, as you can see. Wounded and captured, Reginald Reed is listed as being resident of Brown Hill Post Office when he enlisted in 1915. He was 23 years of age and married to Gwen. In 1916 he sailed on the Anchises, first to England and then to France, where he served in the 14th Battalion. On April 11th, 1917 he was reported missing in action at Rheincourt, but it was not until late July that it was confirmed he had been wounded, suffering a gunshot wound to his left shoulder, taken prisoner of war and imprisoned at Geff-Dulmen in Westphalia, Germany, where he remained until the war's end. He returned to Australia in March 1919, and this is where his final resting place is, on the 3rd of June 1950, aged 60, surviving the war, along with his wife Mabel M. Reed, who must have been the Gwen that's listed here. Perhaps not. Again, another mystery, and cemeteries are always full of mysteries. Lose Beth and Jody, but found them. Here they are. Now, I've left the K2 going all the way through and not really taken too much notice of the K2, so you know, that's something for you to have a look at whenever it starts spiking up. Am I talking about some of the people that we have spoken of? Are they interacting with the K2? I'm letting you decide that one. I'm just going to ask Spirit now. Have I been interacting with any of the people I've been speaking with? Give me a little flash share, that's nice. Thank you for that. Find anything interesting?
Met a lady with a lovely dog.
Oh yeah, I spotted her too. I had a bit of a yak to her.
Found you.
It's pretty cool. Yeah, found me.
Found you, Wally.
Yeah, where's Wally?
Yep.
So I've only gone through one side of the cemetery and I haven't gone through all of the stuff that's written there, so there's definitely going to have to be a part 2, I think. The building here is quite handy because it's got a record, computerised record of all those who have passed away and interned in the cemetery. Let's go and have a quick look in there. So inside here we have a little computer thing that you can look up anybody in this cemetery. Just punch in their names, first name, last name, and it will tell you and give you directions to where their graves are, which is really unique. On the wall here, or over here, got a registry. Just if you'd like to register your name that you've visited the cemetery. And on the walls there's some details of the cemetery. Its first registered burial at Ballarat Old Cemetery was at Van Seymour, aged 33, on the 20th of May 1856. However, records show that burials had taken place on only this site from 1848. A man by the name of Ephesus had appointed himself sexton and buried the dead here for a fee. The cemetery was a rich repository for Ballarat's history, including those events connected to the Eureka Stockade. We've got a few more details here. Gold had been found at this site in 1907 when the grave diggers were preparing to bury T.C. Thomas, himself a gold miner investor. They discovered good gold-bearing quartz. This was analysed at the School of Mines, yielding 3 ounces per tonne. Ballarat residents were eager to begin mining operations. Unfortunately, the quality of good gold waned after 12 feet of exploration. There you go. Some of the graves here are more than 11 feet deep. This was to allow family members to be buried in the same plot, one on top of the other. Throughout the 1800s, it was also common for up to 5 paupers to be buried in the same grave. With only picks, shovels and buckets, it is estimated to have taken 2 men the best part of a day to complete. Today, the whole operation is largely mechanised, taking about 20 minutes. There we go. Pretty cool. We've got one here. Funeral customs of the late 1800s. During the early years of the Ballarat goldfield, death rates were high, and diggers had to use whatever materials they could to bury their mates. In the late 1950s, undertakers were able to offer the full Victorian funeral service: a well-made coffin, a hearse, ostrich plumes, mourning vehicles, and a proper procession. So there's a little bit of information on that. The Waffle Ballarat, with its permanent water and abundance game, was a favourite camping site for the Waffarum tribe. Very little is known about their burial customs. By the 1860s, many had died from European illnesses. That's a local Aboriginal tribe. And now we have some Eureka stuff, justice versus the law. And you can read about the Eureka Stockade, or look it up on YouTube. There's quite a bit about it. We believe the K2 meter is going off because of this computer that I'm standing right behind. Yeah, the computer would have Wi-Fi, so I'll be setting it off. And the camera's not setting it off. Oh, the camera up here. Oh, yeah, it could be too. There you go. So that's the reason why the K2 is going mad in here, as opposed to no reason for it going mad when we're walking around. Anyway, multiculturalism in the goldfields. The gold fever brought fortune seekers to Victoria, not just from Britain, but from all corners of the world: Europe, Prussia, North America, China. These foreigners and ruffians were blamed for much of the unrest and trouble in the goldfields. Even in death, mixed marriages and different customs were the cause of much debate and conflict for the authorities. So there's a little bit of a write-up here of that. Ballarat notables, famous sons and daughters of Ballarat: Richard Henry Sutton, and I'm just having a quick read through here. So some interesting people: Captain Henry Evans, Baker, Thomas Stoddard, who you would have seen a lot of his statues that we've shown in some of our bits of the Botanic Gardens here at Ballarat. Tilly Thompson and Henry Casilli, all of them famed for some reason or another, and those names you can look up, or you can hold this video in certain places and see if you can read it. Very interesting. And this room here is a Eureka flag, along with the English flag. This room here is open for certain hours during the day, and you can actually come and research. If you've got a name you want to research and find out where their grave is, this is the computer you can do it on. Well, I've lost Beth and Jody again. That's not surprising. Well, I think we're just going to end part one here, and I'm going to have a bit of a walk around again to try and find some more, because there are a lot more little story plaques throughout this cemetery. And as I said, I've only just did a brief walk through some of the aisles on the northern side, and we'll hit the southern side because I know there are some interesting storyboards on the southern side as well, so we'll do that probably in our next vid. I just thought it would be nice to you know, have a bit of a wander around and read some of the stories that are connected to the graves, as well as, you know, quite often we're just looking at the graves and reading the headstones and that, but when there are storyboards, it's good to have a bit of a read. This last one here, the Anzac Heritage Walk Trail. The Anzac Heritage Walk Trail consists of 26 locations highlighting the graves and memorials of soldiers and nurses who fought in the Great War 1914 to 1918. These graves are a selection from over 180 within the cemetery and cover a variety of persons not necessarily famous or distinguished, but reflect the effect war had on people, their families, their work, and Ballarat as a city. The Heritage Walk will take approximately 1 hour to complete and offers you the opportunity to reflect on how the war may have had some influence on your family. Maps and information booklets are available from the Information Centre. Gold donation is appreciated to cover the cost of the booklets and maintain the Heritage Walk Trail. You can follow the trail by downloading the audio podcasts, or should be podcasts, whatever. And yeah, so this is a little bit of a cemetery that has a Heritage Walk Trail if you care to follow the walking trails, which we're just walking around willy-nilly and just finding things ourselves, and it's quite often just great to be able to walk around on a beautiful day like today, just to have a look at parts of the cemetery and try to find some of the stories that are behind the graves. Cheers for now. We should be doing a part 2 very soon.